the organization of labor actually meant that actually catapulted into other industries, notably the food and canning industry and any other industry that you can think about. But of course, things changed in 1948 when the National Party actually came into power. They introduced a law called apartheid. And apartheid meant that most passed some laws that did not allow black people to actually organize in the form of unions. That actually meant that most unions, as we know, are formed at the back of communism is like the backbone of unions. It means the sharing of of wealth amongst all those who work the land. You know what I'm saying? So the banning of communism in the form of the Suppression of Communism Act meant that most unions were deemed illegal. You know what I'm saying? Forcing most of them to actually go underground or actually lose power because they could, all of a sudden, they could not negotiate with employers. They could not negotiate with the state because they were deemed illegal. Of course, as you know, with the banning and the weakening of most trade unions, most laborers would have to actually go and look for other unions which are deemed legal according to the government. So that meant that most black Africans actually went and joined more less communist based trade unions. Well, as a people, we are enterprising, and we had to. There were ways that were found around the Suppression of Communism Act, and most more progressive members, rather, of those former unions actually went and actually formed alliance with other unions. Other unions to actually continue the movement of trade unionism amongst Africans. Well, as you know as well, that it was a very turbulent time introduced by apartheid. With laws like the state of emergency. That meant that people need to cannot be at certain places at certain times around South Africa. Um, that meant that most Africans had to actually protest against the oppression that was coming with the apartheid government. The ANC obviously became stronger in campaigns like the resistant campaign, and most trade unions actually had that alliance because of labor issues were now becoming more of a liberation issues. Hence, that connection between trade unions like SACTU, South African Congress of Trade Unions, and ANC. So most trade unions at the time actually took a lot of they took part and actually contributed a lot and actually got involved in a lot of resistant campaigns that were actually created or formed by the ANC simply because there were similarities between their issues, the issues that employees faced at their workplaces. They would actually come back and face in the townships. So there was a lot of similarities in terms of the struggle. So hence that relationship was actually formed. The apartheid government, of course, responded by making it illegal for black unions to be registered and actually recognized within the country. That actually weakened a lot of unions, as we've already spoken. And that the situation obviously progressed, and then in 1960 we had the Sharpeville massacre, where people were actually protesting against past laws. You know what I'm saying? And then with that massacre, actually, the ANC and SACP, the South African Communist Party, formed a military wing of the ANC called cont. And most people who were active in trade unions ended up joining the cont. And most of them left South Africa to go and actually get military training in African countries like Botswana. Some of them went through Swaziland. Some of them went through all the way to Tanzania, you know what I'm saying, Zambia, and all those kind of things. They actually formed camps in those areas because they had to come back and fight for what they believed was their country. You know what I'm saying? So most trade unionists became politicians, and as a result.. And that meant that trade unions actually kind of died down, because of that, because most of the people who actually led those trade unions went abroad to go and train, to get military training to come and fight for the country. Yeah, actually came a time around 1973 where there were a lot of strikes around the Durban region. A wave of strikes from different companies. That meant that they actually resuscitated the union movement in South Africa. That wave of strikes and picketing that actually happened in Durban actually forced the government for the first time to actually reconsider the Suppression of Communism Act, meaning that that actually allowed black unions, black laborers to actually unionize and actually register their unions legally so that they can actually be able to negotiate with their employers. They can be able to negotiate with the state for those who worked for the state. You know what I'm saying? So those recommendations for the registration of black unions was actually made. It was a recommendation by the Weham Commission, which actually said, initially investigated, you know, uh, that whether black people should be allowed to unionize. And that commission actually made recommendations to the apartheid government to say, no, what, as black people are obviously in the majority, and if we want to actually give them minimum rights, we have to let them unionize and actually organize to actually protect their own rights. Well, with the registration of black unions, a paradigm shift actually happened in South African labor. In 1979, the Federation of South African Trade Unions actually happened, which was a paradigm shift in terms of how labor unionizes and actually organizes itself in South Africa. And by 1985, there was already a National Union of Mine Workers, NUM, under the chairpersonship of the current president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. They actually had a 2-day conference between the 8th and 9th of June in 1985. And that conference actually came out with resolutions like non-racialism. So it meant that black people can actually join unions and they can actually organize. Unions don't have to exclusively be black. So they came up with resolutions like racialism, one union, one industry. It means that if you're part of the engineering industry, you have to join a union that is, so each industry has to have its own union. The workers have to be controlled. It means that there needs to be a policy that actually workers know what to follow and what not to follow, the rules that are published and known by everyone else in that union. The representation of the basis of paid membership. It means that if you want a union, you need to actually pay for that membership, and the representation of the membership would actually set the playing field for what we know today for unions to be paid membership of unions. Cooperation at national level. It means that there needs to be one agreement that happens at national level that everyone can follow. Well, fast forward to actually the 30th of November 1985, with the launch of the Congress of South African Trade Unions. The resolutions that they took on that day was to establish one union per industry, which were actually some of the resolutions that came with FOSATU, the Federation of Trade Unions, that actually happened earlier on in that year. Some of the resolutions included the establishment of one union per industry. We've already spoken about that. The exploitation of women. Women apparently were oppressed a lot, and so that had to be dealt with. COSATU, the introduction of COSATU within the trade union space actually meant that they have to deal with that as well. The call for the lifting of the state of emergency, withdrawal of troops from townships. The state of emergency, that meant that back in those days there would be troops most of the time to actually manage people, make sure that people have passed, make people that people are in bed at a particular time. So COSATU actually with the resolution, that was one of them. You know what I'm saying? And then the release of political prisoners like Nelson Mandela, like some Walter Sisulu and them. You know what I'm saying? The release. Those are some of the conditions that they actually gave to the national government at the time. The call for the international pressure and disinvestment. Calling for international governments to actually stop working with the South African government in order to put pressure on them so that they can actually give the oppressed black people minimum rights. You know what I'm saying? The right to strike and picket. It was deemed illegal to strike and picket at some point in South Africa. You know what I'm saying? So COSATU came with those rules to say people must be allowed to actually voice their opinions, to actually voice their discontent. You know what I'm saying? So those are some of the religions, and some of them. Another one was minimum wage, which we become known. We actually come to know today that was one of the resolutions to say there needs to be a minimum amount that one gets paid in South Africa. You know what I'm saying? To extend the trade unions' right to homelands. So take those very basic human rights to the rural areas where people come from. If this happens to be a company that is established somewhere in KwaZulu, maybe a poultry farm is formed there. I mean, those workers actually have the right to also unionize. The law doesn't only apply to people who are working in urban areas like Johannesburg, the mines and railway harbors and all those kind of things. This is how now May Day came about. You know what I'm saying? The reason why today is called May Day, the 1st of May. This day was actually the 1st of May 1986. Marked the 100th anniversary of the International Labour Day, commonly referred to as Labour Day. Before 1986, the day was not a paid holiday until on the 1st of May 1986, more than 1.5 million workers observed this day away, supported by various industries, including the taxi industry, the education unions, forcing media to acknowledge that it was indeed a public holiday. Premier Foods became the first employer to declare the 1st of May and 16 June paid public holiday, forcing many companies to follow suit. So for today to be a holiday, people actually fought, and it was declared that workers' rights are to be acknowledged on this day. So it's not just any other day. You know what I'm saying? We're still fighting for workers' rights today. We know that with the London mine strike that actually took about 34 lives at a go, those are workers' rights. Workers were actually picketing to actually demand a certain amount of money, and most of them died because they were fighting for their rights. So it means that we are not there as a country. We have not yet arrived in terms of workers actually getting their full rights. You know what I'm saying? We still get people getting paid less than the minimum wage that has actually been set by government. So that actually this rather lesson actually forces us to think deep into the history of South African labor and what we deserve and what we do not deserve. Yeah. I hope that you guys enjoyed what we spoke about today. For any more in-depth discussions in as far as this is concerned, you're welcome to hit me up at Big Mesh Talks. Signing out.